John, for agreeing to talk with me today. I am Jenna Robinson. I am here with John Craig, who founded Davidsonians for freedom of thought. He is going to talk to me about some of the things that are going on at Davidson today. Welcome, John.
Nice to be here, Jenna. Thank you.
So, John, let's start at the beginning. When you and I first met, you had only recently founded Davidsonians for freedom of thought. So tell me about that. What is it and what motivated you to start the group?
This goes back to 2018. The full name of our group is Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse. It's a mouthful. We're going for short now, DFTD. But we got going in 2018. I served on the board of the Alumni Council at Davidson for about 8 years. And after I retired, I enjoyed it. I'm also on the board of the classical music station at Davidson, WDAD. And that experience on the Alumni Council sort of awakened me to what was happening to Davidson. I'm a middle of the road person, centrist. My liberal friends call me left wing. My conservative friends call me right wing, whatever. But I'm essentially believe in ideological balance, and that's very important to me. And I believe in free speech. In my experience on the advisory council, the Alumni Advisory Council was very disturbing. I found that it wasn't possible to speak your mind. I found that if you didn't go with the majority flow, you were basically sort of scorned, more or less ostracized, and not recognized, and so on. And then I got to walking around campus and talking to students. And of course, like on most campuses, most Davidson students are liberal, but there are a good number of conservatives all. And the conservatives that I identified, not the liberals, told me, yeah, we have a real problem. We can't speak our minds freely here. And then I had the good fortune of running upon a rising senior at the time, Kenny Zhu, that's SU. Kenny was at the time president of Young Americans for Freedom, dynamite guy. He's gone on to write wonderful books right now that are all over about Asian American issues in America. And Kenny, we were kindred spirits. I said, look, Kenny, this is a real problem, is it not? Yes, it is. Well, let's get some facts. So together, we worked to get some details on what was happening at Davidson on free speech issues, on the lack of ideological balance. And then we went on to, we found that others, alumni, were like-minded. A small group of us banded together. And that's how it all got started, 2018.
Excellent. And so what were your goals then when you first started?
Well, our goals were to do something about free speech, to do something about ideological balance, to see if we could do something with the administration to change things. And so what we did first on that score is that we put together a letter to the president and to the chairman of the board, and circulated to the entire board of trustees, documenting the issues that we saw on free speech, on lack of political balance and ideological balance, on a number of things. And we had specific inquiries there. We asked that the college should adopt the Chicago principles of free expression. We asked that we were very concerned about the political activism of Davidson's current president. There's just a lot of political messaging on campus and so on. We asked that the board of trustees at each board meeting talk about that issue. Is it something they want to be done or not? And to develop policies on it. We were concerned that outside speakers being brought to Davidson were not balanced. They were not representative of the broad political and ideological spectrum. And frankly, we had some concerns about governance. Are the trustees sufficiently attentive and informed on what's going on at Davidson? So we put together a letter and addressed it to our President Quillen. She was very nice, and she invited me up for a conversation. And we did it. We had a private one-on-one conversation. And I found it not very productive in that we basically agreed to completely disagree. And I think probably both of us found the other high-handed and dismissive. And that was that. There was no interest. That she did respond in a very long letter. And then the chairman of the trustees wrote me a letter saying that there's no problem here. So that was, of course, a frustrating experience. And in the meantime, we kept deciding where to go from here. And when you're starting a fledgling group like this, it can be difficult to get organized, particularly if you don't have a lot of muscle in it. So we sort of didn't go dormant, but we set up we weren't successful in getting a web page going, but we did get a Facebook page going. And so that's what happened for the next 3 years.
Okay. And so did you did you try to reach out to any of the other trustees, or was it just the chairman was so dismissive that you decided to back off for a moment?
We did send this letter to all the trustees,
Okay.
and not only the chairman responded, and he said at a very brief message that there's no problem here.
Got it. Got it. So now in 2021, there's a fresh grievance against Davidson. Trustees voted to change some important rules regarding religion. Can you tell me about that new grievance?
So back in 2020, there had been several years. Davidson began in the 1820s as a Presbyterian school and was always Presbyterian. And there was a longstanding bylaws requirement that the president be a member of the Presbyterian Church and that the majority of the trustees be Christian. I'm not sure completely on my facts, but not necessarily Presbyterian, but be Christian. There have been several efforts earlier, decades ago, over the last couple of decades, to change these bylaws, but had not succeeded. But then last fall, in the middle of, this is 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, when everything was locked down, when the trustees were not meeting in person, had not meetings in person for 9 months, the president and chairman of the board pushed through a bylaws change, and which said that the president no longer need to be a Christian, and that 25% of the board needs to be Presbyterian, but no other requirements. So this was, and the manner in which this was done, there were several sort of attempts at it. There were objections. There was a very artificial survey of alumni done, which was very carefully scripted. So the group that arose from this that were opposed to it felt that the process had not been even-handed and open and was not fair and was disorderly. So the president and board chair dug in. The group of 11 former trustees who objected, all former trustees, all quite prominent, including former Governor Martin of North Carolina, wrote a letter to all alumni, 19,000 alumni, objecting to these changes, and it was quite a lengthy letter. In writing this letter, they used addresses from the directory that the college had published 3 years earlier, Directory of Alumni. The college had solicited from alumni, help us, give us your emails. We want alumni to be able to communicate with each other. They had heavily marketed it. They sold the book for over $100. Well, the college got into a real uproar over this group of 11 having used this directory and emails to communicate with alumni. So there was quite a dispute about that. In the end, it sort of died down. But what happened was actually, for our side, a good thing, because this group of frankly very powerful former trustees and were awakened to what's going on. They took a look at our letter and says, wait a minute, we weren't aware of all these things. And so we began to talk with each other and more trustees. And so out of this came new energy with our group, the DFTD, Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse.
Now I'm going to divert your attention for a minute, because I think it's important for people to know, like, how do people get on the board of trustees at Davidson? Because that's essential to understanding what's going on.
Yeah, governance of colleges and universities, private colleges and universities, it's a real, you've seen one. At Davidson, my issues with the process is whether it's 35 or 40, the bylaws provide that Davidson can have 35 or 40 trustees, somewhere in that range. I actually spent my entire career, most of my career, in the nonprofit world, running some very large nonprofit organizations. And this is a prescription for bad governance. A board that large is simply easily not manageable, and it can easily be misused. So that's the starting point. The majority of the boards are self-selected by the chair and the president, quite frankly. There are only 4 elected board members. These are elected by the alumni. Having served on the alumni council board, I've seen that process. They are handpicked, that the candidates are handpicked and gone through and in theory, the council actually votes and decides, well, that's rubber stamping. Mm-hmm. And then in the ballot that goes to all alumni to decide which ones are elected, there's no requirement at all that candidates say anything about what they would do if they go on the board, what they think the issues at Davidson are, and what they think is need to make Davidson continue to be a great college. So the process, there are only 4 elected, and it's really sort of a popularity contest. So it's not a healthy setup for boards. Now, there are great people on the board.
Right.
That's not an issue. But it's a very mixed bag, and because of its size, it's very difficult to be actually accountable, for the president to have accountable body to report to.
Right. And my guess is with that process, you don't get a whole lot of dissent on the board either.
You don't get a whole lot of
dissent.
Dissent. That is my understanding. That a lot of dissent. Certainly, you do not get ideological and political balance on the board, because it's a very much it's clubbish. People get to go on it for good reasons, but it's more it's clubbish.
Right. So now you've identified problems. This new group of trustees has identified problems. So where do things stand right now?
Well, as I said, we, as a result of this brouhaha over the bylaws change, we really got our group mobilized. The Davidsonians for Freedom of Thought and Discourse became quite active. We wrote a letter to 1,500 alumni whose emails we got quite separately through a snowballing process, the way social media works, telling them about the issues that we had raised 3 years earlier, our continuing concerns about the state of free expression at Davidson, our concerns about the specific things that were going on at Davidson, the lack of open discourse, the concerns about quality. We have real concerns about the quality of education, what's happening to it. And of course, we got interesting feedback. The main thing we did is that we had earlier asked that they had put a petition for signing the Chicago principles, that Davidson adopt the Chicago principles. And we reiterated that, put that out. And as a result, this spring, we now have over 180 people that signed the petition. And we asked that the board was to meet in July, that be on the agenda, for Davidson to be on the agenda. I don't think I mentioned earlier that one of the requests that we worked with the president on was that FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, has consistently had to give Davidson red light. That's the lowest possible on free speech. And it's the only, I think, private North Carolina college that gets a red line. And we had asked to take correction on that. We worked with FIRE to what changes would get us off of this. I asked FIRE to inform Davidson. Nothing happened for 3 years. The changes are not big. Nothing happened. So we raised that issue again. And then in at the July board retreat, the petition request did not go on the agenda because, as it turns out, it was not a decision-making meeting. But out of that meeting, the president announced that she'd been at Davidson 10 years and that she would be stepping down after another year, and the end of the calendar year of the academic year in 2022. I'm sure that Carol planned to do this anyway. And we can't claim any role in that, but I think that we probably had it's time for a change, and most people agree with that. She will be coming back, and that's terrific as a professor after a year's sabbatical. So there was announced the presidential search committee, and former Charlotte Mayor Anthony Fox and U.S. Secretary of Transportation under the Obama administration will be chairing that. And he's a fine man, and we have conversations with him. We wrote him asking for a position on the search committee. The search committee, as it was announced, will consist of trustees, many of whom are donors, faculty, staff, college staff, students. But there's no mention of donors, alumni representation, who are not also trustees. The single largest stakeholder groups in the institution, the single largest stakeholder groups don't have a role in selecting the CEO. It's quite amazing, I find. The college has dug in on this, and we have great conversations with Mayor Fox, that they will not do it, although they promise that we will have some role, our voice will be heard, and that remains to be seen. So as a result of all of this, we have communicated again just this week, as a matter of fact, with our group, over 1,100 donors now, explaining where we're going with DFTD. First of all, we are incorporating. We are getting our IRS letter that we are a nonprofit so that we can raise funds to keep this activity going. we will hire a staff person, an executive director, who will be based in Davidson. In other words, we see this struggle for Davidson Soul as a long-term struggle, and that we need to gear up for it. It's not going to be one in a day, may not be one ever, but it's worth a struggle. In the short term, we are trying to produce information that we think will be useful to the search committee, and it will hopefully be given some attention. This week or early next week, we will be sending, we have hired a very fine research firm to do a survey of major donors, asking them about what they think the colleges, how it should be regarding ideological and political balance. To what extent are they aware, is free speech an issue or not? Do they value free speech? Is it important for the college? And then we had in our discussion with letter to Mayor Fox, we had laid out 12 criteria and priorities that we thought should be prominent in choosing the next president. And we asked questions, specific survey questions on this of the alumni. Do they think these criteria are valuable or not? Like, should free speech be a major priority of the next president? Should political activism be avoided by the next president? Should the college adopt the president push for the adoption and vigorous activation of the Chicago principles of free expression? Should they be given real attention to rising costs to tuition at Davidson? We're very concerned about the college ultimately pricing itself out of the market. Demographically, students are going to be declining. Costs are rising. You saw in today's paper that men increasingly are not going to college relative to women and so on. These are big issues, and these small liberal arts colleges are facing probably over the long term. The weeding out process has already begun. Now, Davidson's a very strong institution, and it's a very wealthy one, but everyone is going to really have to get their act together, survive, and be sure that they're producing people, young people who are prepared for productive lives in the workforce. So we laid out a lot of criteria, including, do you think the president should be have the Christian faith or not? So we'll get feedback, and we'll be giving this to the search committee, and hope that they'll find it useful.
That's excellent. If a Davidson alum sees this video and wants to get in touch or become a member of DTFD, how do they do that?
Well, one thing that we're short on so far is a website. We had a primitive website, I would say, 3 years ago, and but it's basic, has languished, and now that we are geared up for really get moving, that's the next thing we're going to do, is invest in a website. That takes money. And so that will be the best way to do it. In the meantime, my email is available. People know how to reach me and other members of our group, and that will be it. So when people ask us, we tell them to stay in touch. We're developing a database, and soon, hopefully by a couple of months, we'll have a really good website. You know, to be in this business, that in this day and world, you've got to have a great website, clearinghouse.
Absolutely. And so what advice would you give? You know, Davidson is not the only university that is facing the problems that you named. There are a lot of, like you said, a lot of liberal arts institutions, a lot of small schools that are going to be competing for students going forward, and kind of, you know, having this same battle for the soul of the institution. What advice can you give?
Well, the first is, if you see a problem, speak up. People are very wary of showing their cards and speaking up on this issue. It's unfortunately, it's of our times, and that people who have concerns about free expression are particularly shy of saying, wait a minute, this is something that's going on wrong here. So speak up and find others. You'll be surprised how many others out there are like-minded. I'll tell you, when I was on the advisory council, the college advisory council of alumni, the chair and I sat together for 2 years, both of us basically quiet because we were told to be quiet, not unaware until my last meeting, we happened to have breakfast again to discover that we were like-minded. That's how squelched people are. So look for allies and colleagues. Get solid evidence. You know, we're still dealing on anecdotes, and you can always be dismissed with anecdotes. Oh, that's not so. You're extrapolating from a one-time experience. So that's why we're doing surveys of donors, and we'll be doing surveys of other groups to get hard facts to present to this committee. Organize for the long term. This battle is not a short range one. It's a long term. one. And so you really need to gear up with a strong organization. It's important to have really strong communications. I mentioned the website, frequent messaging to your donors. Those things are important. And then look for horror stories and advertise them. There are plenty out there. For example, this year, and so far people are doing it themselves, at Davidson on the women's basketball team, a rising senior who was a very fine young woman was pressured to kneel, as were all of her colleagues, at the opening during the national anthem of a basketball game. She didn't, and several others of her colleagues didn't, but she was pressured to do that. And this is, for us, a abuse of power and of free speech. And she wrote an article, and it got widespread attention. Recently, it was announced that Davidson has a course, Abolish the Police course. Now, that's a good topic, but if that's a topic, shouldn't there be a companion course like the role of police in a civil society? So when these things happen, let people know and raise objections. I think that those things are very important. And that's the sort of thing we'll be doing on our website.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, John. Best of luck to DTFD, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Jenna. It's a pleasure to talk.
Thank you.